He was just the janitor's son, invisible, unwanted, until the principal pulled him on stage to humiliate him. "Solve this," he sneered, pointing to a math problem no seventh grader should even understand. The room laughed. The chalk hit the board, and what happened next wasn't just unexpected, it was impossible. But before he could finish, the principal yanked him off stage. And later that night, someone found the full solution, hidden behind the board, changing everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Jefferson Heights Academy prided itself on polished marble floors, award-winning faculty, and gleaming banners that declared diversity, excellence, integrity. But what the brochures never showed was the hidden layer beneath. The quiet, coded ways in which certain students were made to feel invisible. The smiles from teachers faded faster for those whose last names didn't come with donations or legacy. And if your skin was darker, your background humbler, your presence in the hallways felt more like tolerated background noise than welcomed belonging. 12-year-old Colton Briggs knew that feeling all too well. While other 7th graders tossed footballs on manicured fields, or compared phones outside the school's private cafe, Colton found sanctuary beneath the building, in the boiler-lined tunnels, cluttered storage closets, and the dim janitorial break room that buzzed with fluorescent fatigue. That was where his father, Elijah Briggs, spent most of his evenings pushing mop buckets and scraping off the sticky disrespect left behind by the children of lawyers, politicians, and local CEOs. Colton never minded waiting there. He brought a backpack filled with worn notebooks and secondhand textbooks. His favorites weren't from the 7th grade curriculum, though. They were the ones Elijah salvaged from recycling bins: calculus guides, physics manuals, and linear algebra workbooks, discarded by older students who never thought twice about what they left behind. It started small. At age 10, Colton began solving algebra problems by copying examples out of old SAT prep books. Then came geometry proofs. By 12, he was exploring theoretical problems most high school seniors couldn't wrap their heads around. The formulas spoke to him: clean, fair, logical, unlike the world above ground, where teachers called on him less, graded him slower, and always kept a skeptical eye on his homework. His answers were too advanced, his logic too rehearsed. One teacher even accused him of copying answers from the internet, though Colton didn't even have home Wi-Fi. Still, he never complained. He learned to fade into the background, to not make noise, to never draw attention. Elijah always told him, people like us gotta be twice as good to be seen half as much. So Colton stayed quiet, observed, absorbed, grew, until one fall morning turned his invisibility into a spotlight he never asked for. It was the annual Jefferson Heights Math and Merit Assembly, an event more about showcasing the school's high achievers than encouraging academic curiosity. Every year, honors students competed in a live problem-solving challenge on stage, with principals, teachers, and parents watching. It was a performance as much as it was a competition, one that Colton never expected to be part of. He had been told earlier that week he wasn't on the roster, so he sat near the back of the auditorium, with the other 7th graders, quietly scribbling equations in the margins of his note. Then, Principal William Dalton, tall, broad-shouldered, and always dressed like he was interviewing for governor, stepped up to the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "today we do something different. Today we test not just our elite, but our unseen." A hush fell across the room. Dalton's eyes scanned the auditorium like a hunter choosing his mark. They stopped on Colton. "You," he said, pointing. "Colton Briggs, why don't you come down?" There was a long pause. Colton's heart dropped. Every student in the room turned. Some smirked. Others whispered. Colton stood slowly. The auditorium lights felt hot and unfair. He walked toward the stage, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. He saw his father leaning in the back doorway, still in his janitor's uniform, mop in hand, frozen in disbelief. "Let's give Colton a round of applause," Dalton said, a tone of mock encouragement in his voice. The claps were polite. Some were sarcastic. Dalton moved aside and revealed the problem on the projector screen. It wasn't simple algebra. It wasn't even geometry. It was calculus, a second-year high school problem involving rate of change, variables, and an integration twist at the end. The kind of question that takes practiced intuition and advanced technique. Dalton smiled. "Let's see what the janitor's son can do." The crowd chuckled. A teacher in the corner shifted uncomfortably. Elijah stood frozen in the back, eyes locked on his son. Colton's palms were sweaty as he picked up the chalk. He stared at the board. For a moment, he was quiet. And then he started. He drew fast, but not carelessly. Step by step, he broke the problem into manageable parts. He rewrote the functions, set boundaries, applied the chain rule with methodical grace. With each movement, murmurs from the audience turned from giggles to confusion, then to stunned silence. The boy wasn't just solving the problem, he was mastering it. Dalton's smile tightened. Colton's breathing was steady. The chalk danced. He could feel the math like a song. Each stroke was a note, each shift in function a rhythm. He was nearing the final integration when Dalton abruptly stepped forward. "That's enough," he said loudly. Colton paused. Chalk midair. Dalton laughed. "Time's up. But hey, look at that effort. Give him a hand." The audience clapped awkwardly. Colton stepped back. His answer was almost finished. Almost, but not quite. And Dalton made sure of that. He was led off stage to a few pats on the back from other kids who didn't mean them. Laughter followed as he walked back to his seat. His father remained frozen near the exit, jaw clenched. But just before stepping down, Colton glanced at the back of the chalkboard, the side facing away from the audience. Without a word, he quickly scrawled the final answer and boxed it. Then he walked off. Dalton never noticed, but someone else would. Principal Dalton challenges Colton publicly with a problem meant for high school seniors. But Colton secretly finishes the solution on the back of the board before walking off stage. The sound of Colton's footsteps had barely faded from the stage when Principal Dalton stepped back to the microphone. His smile was wide, but it didn't reach his eyes. It never did when he wanted something, especially when that something involved proving a point at someone else's expense. "Well," Dalton announced, clapping his hands once as though signaling the end of a circus act. "That was educational." A few parents chuckled. Several students snickered. A cluster of 8th grade boys near the front whispered loud enough for the 7th graders behind them to hear. "Told you he'd choke." "Knew it! Janitor brains!" Colton lowered his head as he walked down the short stairs at the side of the stage. He tightened his grip on the railing, trying to keep his hands steady. He wasn't hurt by the math. He understood the math. What stung was the sharp twist in the room's energy. How quickly admiration turned into mockery at Dalton's command. He had felt something rising, something powerful and electric while solving the problem, and then Dalton cut it clean. Not because Colton was struggling, but because he wasn't. Dalton had seen the board filling too fast, too accurately, too confidently, and he couldn't let that continue. When Colton reached the floor, a student leaned to whisper as he passed, "Better stick to mops, genius." Another said, "Did your dad teach you that trick? Scrubbing numbers into floors?" A couple laughed. One teacher looked away, pretending not to hear. Colton kept walking. The auditorium lights made everything feel exposed, as though every face in the room was pressed up against him. He found his seat near the back, but he didn't sit. He stood near the aisle, trying to steady his breath. His father, Elijah, remained near the doorway, unmoving. Their eyes met for a split second. Elijah's expression a mixture of pride and worry, but Colton looked away first. Dalton continued his performance on stage. "Math," he said dramatically, "is about discipline, about patience, and sometimes about knowing when you're outmatched." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Colton swallowed hard. Then, just when Dalton seemed ready to move on, a voice rose from the audience. "That boy wasn't outmatched," said Mr. Hawthorne, his tone stern, unyielding. "You stopped him." The auditorium went silent. Dalton turned slowly. "Excuse me, Mr. Hawthorne." A senior math teacher with 20 years under his belt stood from the far side of the room. His salt and pepper beard bristled with restrained anger. He glanced briefly at Colton, then back to Dalton. "You interrupted him mid-solution," Hawthorne said. "He wasn't struggling, he was progressing." Dalton smiled tightly. "We have rules, Mr. Hawthorne. Time limits. Structure." "You've never enforced a time limit on stage before," Hawthorne shot back. Murmurs spread across the crowd like a tremor. Dalton's smile sharpened. "Are you questioning my judgment?" "I'm questioning your fairness," Hawthorne replied. Dalton stepped forward. "This assembly is designed to highlight student excellence. Let's not derail it over sentiment." The pause before he said sentiment carried a sting. It implied inferiority. It implied that defending a black boy, a janitor's son, was an emotional overreaction, rather than an academic truth. Colton felt the heat rise in his chest. Hawthorne exhaled, defeated for the moment, and sat down. Dalton turned back to the audience with smug composure. "Moving on," he said. "Let's continue with our qualified participants." Colton felt the word qualified like a slap. As the next student was called to the stage, the attention drifted elsewhere. The laughter faded. But Colton felt as though everyone still watched him, even when their eyes didn't. His seat now felt too small, too exposed, too dangerous. After a moment, he stepped out of the aisle and walked quietly toward the exit where his father waited. Elijah placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You did good, son," he whispered. Colton didn't reply at first. His voice felt stuck somewhere between anger and shame. "He stopped me," he finally murmured. "I know. He didn't want me to finish. I know." Colton hesitated. "Why?" Elijah inhaled slowly, looking at the polished floor rather than the auditorium. "Sometimes people don't like when someone they think should stay low starts to rise." Colton blinked up at him. "You mean because of, our place?" Elijah clenched his jaw. "Your place is wherever your mind takes you, not wherever they try to keep you." But Colton's chest remained heavy. It didn't feel like that today. Elijah looked down at him, eyes softening. "No. Today felt wrong, but wrong doesn't get the last word, unless you let it." Colton exhaled shakily. They laughed. "I heard." "And Principal Dalton." Elijah cut him off with a quiet firmness. "Principal Dalton is a man who likes control more than truth." Before Colton could respond, another burst of laughter erupted from inside the auditorium. A student on stage was attempting a far easier problem, and failing miserably. The audience found it hilarious. Colton looked up again at the door, at the stage he'd just left, at the chalkboard hidden behind the landing curtain. He remembered the chalk still in his fingers, the last flick of his wrist, the solution he scribbled behind the board. He didn't know why he'd done that. It felt instinctive, like leaving a signature where no one could erase it. A quiet rebellion. Elijah nudged him gently. "Let's get some air." They walked into the hallway. The polished floor gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights, a manufactured brightness that never reached the school's shadows. The silence here felt different, not safer but less suffocating. "What you did," Elijah said softly, breaking the silence, "was brave." Colton shook his head. "I didn't feel brave." "Bravery isn't about feeling it. It's about doing things anyway." Colton looked down at his hands. Chalk dust still clung to his fingertips. Inside the auditorium, applause rose again. Loud, rehearsed, hollow. But to Colton, it sounded like applause for a world he wasn't invited into. Elijah squeezed his shoulder. "Let's go home, kiddo." But before they could leave, the auditorium doors swung open, and a group of parents walked out talking loudly, their words carrying the sharp edges adults often pretend not to have. That boy had no business on stage. Dalton should have known better. It's embarrassing to bring staff children into academic events. Imagine the headlines if he'd actually finished. God forbid. Elijah froze. Colton stood perfectly still. One of the mothers noticed them, and stiffened, as if embarrassed to have been overheard. But embarrassment wasn't the same as regret. "Come on," she said sharply to her friend, guiding her away. Elijah inhaled slowly, steadying himself. "Let's keep moving," he murmured. Colton nodded, but something cold settled in his chest. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words dissolved before reaching his mouth. He followed Elijah down the hall, footsteps soft but heavy in the silence. They reached the exit doors just as another burst of applause echoed behind them. The sound felt like a door slamming in his face. Outside, the afternoon light was painfully bright. Colton blinked against it, breathing in the crisp fall air. A gust of wind brushed the chalk dust from his hands. For a moment the world seemed too big, too loud, too unfair. "Elijah," a voice called from behind. Both father and son turned. It was Mr. Hawthorne, hurrying toward them with papers in hand. "I just wanted to say," Hawthorne said, breathing hard, "your son didn't deserve what happened in there." Elijah nodded slowly. "We know." Hawthorne lowered his voice. He was close to finishing, very close. Colton looked up. "I did finish," he said softly. "On the back of the board." Hawthorne paused, taken aback. "On the back?" Colton nodded. "I didn't want to leave it incomplete." Hawthorne stared at him with an expression Colton rarely saw from adults at this school. "Respect." "Well," Hawthorne said quietly, "then I think I have something to check tonight." He slipped back inside before Elijah, or Colton, could respond. Elijah exhaled. Let's go home. They walked toward the parking lot, unaware that behind them, Hawthorne had already reached the stage and was staring at the chalkboard with disbelief. Because what Colton had written wasn't just correct. It was brilliant. That night, Mr. Hawthorne remains in the auditorium long after everyone leaves, and when he flips the board around, he realizes the unfinished solution isn't unfinished at all. It's complete, precise, and mathematically extraordinary. The auditorium was dark now. Hours had passed since the last round of applause faded, since students spilled back into the halls buzzing with gossip and exaggeration. Empty popcorn boxes littered the corners. The maintenance crew had long since turned off the lights, and yet one figure remained near the stage, motionless, almost reverent. Mr. Hawthorne stood before the chalkboard, his hand trembling slightly, as he reached for the latch that released the back panel. He hadn't told anyone he stayed. He hadn't answered Dalton's parting jab about being too emotionally involved. He hadn't even gone to his car. Something gnawed at him, deeper than curiosity, a quiet, steady sense of injustice he couldn't shake. A boy had been humiliated in front of the entire school for being too good, and that boy had left a clue behind. A statement. Click. The board rotated with a creak, revealing the back. Hawthorne's breath caught. There, etched in stark white chalk against the dusty black surface, was the rest of the problem. Finished, boxed, solved. Not just solved, but done with an elegance that made his stomach turn with awe. The final steps flowed seamlessly from the initial equation, leading to the answer with such confident precision that Hawthorne had to step closer to believe it. He read the integration twice. Then again, he pulled out his phone and snapped a photo. Then he wiped the chalkboard clean, almost hesitantly, as if erasing something sacred. But it wasn't out of disrespect. It was instinct. Protect the evidence. He'd seen how fast things could be lost in this school when they didn't suit the image. He wasn't going to give anyone a chance to erase this again. Later that evening, Hawthorne sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by reference books and his old graduate school notes. He pulled out a notepad and reworked the entire problem from scratch, checking Colton's process against the standard solution. Every single step held. The substitutions, the boundary setup, the method of use substitution, all of it tracked. But it wasn't just the accuracy that stunned him. It was the way Colton had approached it. With flair, with intuition, the kind of mathematical insight that couldn't be taught in a single classroom. It came from something deeper, a mind tuned to pattern and logic like a second language. This isn't just a smart kid, Hawthorne muttered to himself. This is a prodigy. His wife glanced up from across the room, watching his face shift through disbelief, then admiration, then worry. Another gifted student? She asked, gently. Hawthorne looked at her, more than gifted. He's different. She raised an eyebrow. I've taught kids for 25 years. I've seen exceptional, brilliant, even genius. He paused, holding up Colton's recreated equation. But I've never seen this. Not like this. What are you going to do? He leaned back in his chair. First, I'm going to do what Dalton didn't. I'm going to tell the truth. The next morning, Hawthorne arrived early. The school was nearly empty. Just a few yawning staff and the cleaning crew finishing up. The air buzzed faintly with the scent of disinfectant and floor wax. He walked straight to the administrative office. Principal Dalton sat behind his desk, sipping coffee and scrolling through emails. He didn't look up when Hawthorne entered. I need 5 minutes, Hawthorne said firmly. Dalton finally looked up. This early? It's about Colton Briggs. Dalton sighed, setting the mug down. Hawthorne. No. Listen. Hawthorne cut in. He finished that problem. On the back of the board. Every step. Correct. Dalton's eyes narrowed. I verified it myself. It's not just accurate. It's brilliant. This isn't a fluke. You tried to embarrass him, and he still outperformed every student on that stage. There was a pause. Dalton leaned back, arms crossed. And you're here because… What exactly? You want me to apologize to the janitor's son on school intercom?
Hawthorne stiffened. I want the school to recognize what he's done. I want his work entered into the Math League regional database. I want him on the advanced track now.
Dalton snorted. You know how that would look? To who? Hawthorne snapped. You mean the parents who fund the boosters? The board members who play golf with the mayor? Are you really afraid of celebrating a black kid because it might make the wrong people uncomfortable? Dalton didn't answer immediately. His silence said more than words could. You don't know what kind of waves that would make. Dalton finally muttered. Hawthorne's voice dropped. Maybe the kind of waves this school needs. Dalton stood. Mr. Hawthorne, you're walking a fine line here. This isn't your crusade. We have policies, procedures, and frankly, I'm not about to derail our academic hierarchy over one janitor's kid who had a lucky moment. Hawthorne felt the fury rise in his throat, but he swallowed it. It wasn't luck, it was ability. And if this school can't see that, I'll find someone who will. Without waiting for a response, he turned and left the office. That night, Hawthorne didn't sleep. He sat in his garage-turned office, surrounded by stacks of papers, emails, and academic databases. After years of teaching, he knew the channels, competitions, foundations, statewide scholarship councils, all designed to find exceptional students, and he knew exactly where to send Colton's work. He took out the photo of Colton's solution and scanned it. Then he typed an email to the State Board of Academic Talent Search, an agency tasked with scouting top-performing students for early advancement, to whom it may concern. Attached is a photograph of a solution written by a 7th-grade student at Jefferson Heights Academy during an open assembly. The problem presented was intended for AP-level calculus students. The student solved it entirely, without preparation, under pressure, and with no prior instruction in this subject. This is not a hoax. I've verified every step. The student's name is Colton Elijah Briggs. I urge you to review this. Robert Hawthorne, senior mathematics educator. He hit send. Then, for the first time in years, he prayed. Not for recognition, not for reward. He prayed for the system to do the right thing for once. Across town, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, Colton sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and blank notebook. He wasn't writing math equations tonight. He was sketching. A giant chalkboard, split in half. On one side, the equations Dalton let him write. On the other, the side no one saw, the part he'd finished in secret. A smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Elijah entered, carrying a pizza box. Drawing? Sort of, Colton said. Just remembering. Elijah set the box down. You did something important, kid. Colton looked up. I didn't finish it for them. I finished it for me. Elijah's smile was quiet. That's what makes it matter. They sat together in silence, the TV flickering in the background, the world unaware of the quiet storm that had already begun brewing. Hours after Hawthorne sends the email to the state board, his inbox pings. The board has already replied. They've reviewed the solution, and they want to speak to Colton immediately, confidentially. The email response from the State Board of Academic Talent came faster than Mr. Hawthorne expected, less than 24 hours after he'd sent Colton's solution. The message wasn't just routine acknowledgement. It was glowing. Words like exceptional, preternatural intuition, and clear signs of advanced aptitude leaped off the screen. They wanted to speak with Colton directly, as soon as possible. The board even mentioned potential eligibility for an elite summer STEM camp designed for students years ahead of their grade level. There was one caveat: the invitation had to come through proper channels, meaning it had to go through the school, through Principal Dalton. Hawthorne printed the email and walked straight to Dalton's office. The principal looked up from his desk with thinly veiled irritation. You again. This is important, Hawthorne said, placing the email in front of him. It's about Colton. Dalton scanned the message, his eyes narrowing slightly. They want to interview him. Hawthorne continued. A full scholarship, national mentorship. This could change his life. Dalton folded the paper in half without a word. You'll forward it? Hawthorne asked. Dalton leaned back in his chair. Let me be clear. I'm not here to promote theatrics. The last thing this school needs right now is more headlines, more distractions. This isn't a distraction, Hawthorne said. This is merit. Dalton's jaw tightened. He's not even in the accelerated program. He's not in it because you never allowed him in. Hawthorne snapped. A beat of silence passed between them. Dalton placed the folded email in his drawer and closed it. Thank you for your concern, he said, dismissing him. Hawthorne left with his fist clenched. That afternoon, Dalton deleted the forwarded message from the state board. Then he sent a memo to all faculty, warning against engaging in unauthorized academic advocacy that may reflect bias or unprofessional favoritism. The message was dressed in policy language, but read like a warning shot, particularly to those watching the Colton situation unfold. But one person on staff wasn't ready to let it go. Ms. Alicia Rivera, a young technology coordinator barely 2 years into her role. had overheard Hawthorne's visit. She was the kind of employee most administrators overlooked. Quiet, soft-spoken, and usually glued to a screen. But she had been following the situation closely, and when she checked the email logs from the office system, which she had clearance to audit, she saw it. The deleted correspondence from the state board. She didn't confront Dalton. She didn't tell Hawthorne. She simply downloaded the entire thread, saved it to her encrypted drive, and sent it anonymously to a popular local education watchdog blog. The subject line read, "You need to see this. The school is hiding a genius." The post went up at 7. By 9:17 p.m., it had over 3,000 shares. By midnight it hit Twitter's trending list under Janitor's Son Genius. The screenshot showed everything. Colton's verified solution. The board's enthusiastic response. Dalton's failure to respond. But what made the story viral wasn't just the math. It was the cruelty of the system. The blog's headline said it all. A black prodigy solved a senior math problem. His school tried to bury it. People were outraged. Celebrities tweeted. Activists weighed in. Anonymous accounts reposted classroom videos of Dalton from past assemblies, accusing him of favoritism, discrimination, and gatekeeping. Reddit threads dissected the entire culture of Jefferson Heights Academy. TikTok creators stitched reactions, sobbing or raging. The story became a flashpoint for every buried story of educational injustice, and Colton Briggs was at the center. By the next morning, 3 local news vans were parked outside the school gates. Inside the Briggs apartment, Elijah stood frozen in the living room, as the television played the viral news clip on repeat. Colton sat on the couch, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the screen as if watching someone else's life unfold. There was his name, his face, his equation, and there was Dalton's voice from a past assembly. We must maintain our academic standards, not lower them for convenience. Colton turned away. Elijah muted the volume. I should have seen this coming. I didn't want this, Colton whispered. I know. I just wanted to finish the problem. Elijah sat beside him. And you did. You finished it with integrity. What they did after, that's not your fault. Colton buried his head into his father's shoulder. An alert buzzed on Elijah's phone. A reporter asking for a quote. He ignored it. Another email. This one from the school's front desk. Something about ensuring Colton's safety during the growing media storm. That was all Elijah needed to hear. I'm pulling you out, he said. Effective today. Colton lifted his head. What about the camp? I'll handle it. That afternoon, the apartment was quiet. Colton sat at the kitchen table again, this time with a Zoom link open on the laptop. On the screen, 4 faces from the state board appeared. They greeted him kindly. They asked about his interests, his learning habits, his dreams. They didn't speak down to him. They asked real questions, listened to real answers. You don't belong in a normal math class, one of them said. You belong somewhere your ideas can grow. Then came the offer. A summer at a renowned STEM camp for gifted youth. Access to advanced labs, mentorship from PhDs. A full ride, no cost. Everything covered. Colton blinked. That sounds amazing. There's only one thing we need, the coordinator said. A formal endorsement from your school principal. We sent the paperwork to Mr. Dalton yesterday. Colton froze. Elijah, who stood behind the camera out of view, clenched his jaw. The next day, Dalton stood at the school's printer, staring at the endorsement form in his hands. It was standard. Signature, stamp and date. He placed it on his desk. Then he slid it into the shredder. The machine whirred. The paper disappeared. Unaware that Dalton has destroyed the paperwork, Colton excitedly tells Elijah he's ready for the camp, but behind closed doors the rejection letter has already been mailed. The envelope arrived 2 days later. Plain, white, unmarked, stuffed in the Briggs mailbox between utility bills and grocery flyers. Elijah opened it, expecting a form, maybe a press request, possibly even something from the state board. What he pulled out instead was a single-page letter printed on Jefferson Heights Academy letterhead. There was no greeting, no explanation, just one devastating sentence. We regret to inform you that due to missing administrative endorsements, Colton Briggs's application to the STEM Leadership Summer Institute has been withdrawn from consideration. It hit Elijah like a gut punch. He reread the sentence 3 times before he realized what it meant. Dalton never signed it. He didn't lose the paperwork. He didn't forget. He deliberately blocked it. And now, the opportunity was gone. Elijah stood motionless in the kitchen, the letter trembling in his fingers. Across the room, Colton was solving a logic puzzle on the whiteboard. He looked up, hopeful. Did they reply? Elijah quickly folded the letter and shoved it in his back pocket. Not yet. He lied. He didn't have the heart to tell his son that the door had been slammed shut, not by fate, not by misfortune, but by a man paid to nurture students like him. That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. Anger twisted inside him like barbed wire. He thought about marching into Dalton's office the next morning, shoving the letter in his face, demanding answers. But then a new sound broke the silence. The television, left on mute, in the living room, flashed with breaking news. Elijah turned up the volume. The headline read, "Principal Dalton under fire. Records reveal pattern of racial disparities." The story was already in motion. Following the viral leak of Colton's solution and Dalton's suppression of the endorsement, journalists had started digging. At first it was simple curiosity, trying to understand who the man behind the scandal was. What they found lit a match under the entire institution. Archived disciplinary logs from Dalton's 6-year tenure showed a disturbing pattern. Black and Latino students accounted for over 70% of suspensions at Jefferson Heights, despite being less than 20% of the student body. Advanced placement recommendations showed even starker disparities. While white students with B averages were often placed into accelerated tracks, black students with straight A's were referred for reevaluation or denied altogether. But it didn't stop there. A former guidance counselor came forward, anonymously at first, then publicly. She'd kept records. There were memos, emails, private meeting notes. One described Dalton instructing staff to keep a tight lid on advancement requests from certain demographics to maintain academic consistency. Another detailed how a student, Marcus Landon, lost his National Merit nomination when Dalton failed to submit his application on time. A student who, like Colton, was black and from a working-class home. Marcus, now a college junior, released a video response. "I was that kid," he said. "I thought I wasn't good enough. I thought I messed up. Turns out, they just didn't want me seen." His voice broke halfway through. The clip went viral overnight. The next morning a crowd formed outside Jefferson Heights. Some held signs in support of Colton. Others demanded Dalton resign. Some were just angry, tired, fed up with years of smiling racism, wrapped in polite policies. Inside the school, staff tension ran high. Half the teachers began distancing themselves from Dalton, citing misaligned values. The other half, mostly senior staff, defended him, arguing he had always maintained academic rigor and protected the school's legacy. The split became visible: whispered alliances, fractured conversations in the lounge, silences in staff meetings so thick you could cut them. The PTA was worse. Their emergency meeting the following night was held in the cafeteria and quickly descended into chaos. "I'm not letting this school turn into a political sideshow," one parent shouted. "You mean you're not ready for your privilege to be challenged?" Another fired back. Someone banged on a table. Someone else called security. A police officer arrived just before fists did. At home, Elijah watched it all unfold. Colton sat next to him, curled up in a blanket, quiet. Every few minutes, a news anchor said his name. Colton Briggs, the boy who solved the impossible. Colton Briggs, the new face of suppressed black excellence. His picture was everywhere, but his life felt smaller than ever. "I didn't ask for this," Colton finally said. Elijah nodded, eyes still on the screen. "You didn't have to. You earned it. That's why it scares them." Colton looked at his father, confused. Why would being smart scare anyone? Elijah turned to face him. "Because people in power have built entire systems betting that you wouldn't be." Colton didn't reply, but his jaw tightened slightly. He turned back to the TV. A protester held up a sign that read, "Let Colton rot." The next twist came from the district office. Due to mounting public pressure, a full review of Dalton's tenure was ordered by the school board. Investigators began interviewing former students, analyzing data, even pulling past surveillance logs. Anonymous tips flooded in. Old staff emails were leaked. Then came the subpoena. Dalton was ordered to provide documentation regarding all declined academic endorsements over the past 3 years. He tried to fight it, claimed confidentiality, said the files were missing. But then Ms. Rivera, the quiet tech coordinator, produced backup logs from the school's server showing the shredded endorsement request for Colton's STEM camp. Dalton was caught, red-handed. That afternoon, an emergency school board hearing was announced. Parents would be allowed to attend. Media would be limited. And witnesses could be called. Then the email arrived at the Briggs apartment. Official letterhead, sealed with the district's digital signature. Subject, formal invitation to testify at public hearing. To Colton Elijah Briggs. From Jefferson Heights Board of Trustees. You are hereby invited to provide testimony at the upcoming hearing regarding academic practices, equity, and administrative conduct at Jefferson Heights Academy. Your testimony will be considered part of the formal investigation. Colton stared at the screen. His mouth opened, then closed. Elijah stepped behind him, reading over his shoulder. They want me to talk, Colton said finally. At a microphone, in front of everyone. Elijah placed a hand on his shoulder. They want the truth, and they're finally ready to listen. Colton looked down. What if I mess up? You won't. Colton shook his head. What if they still don't care? Elijah paused. Then you speak anyway. Because when you've been silenced for this long, just being heard is power. Colton nodded slowly. Then he clicked accept. As Colton prepares for the hearing, a confidential email is sent to the superintendent's office, warning that Dalton may have blackmailed past staff into silence, and that more explosive secrets are buried in the school's records. The gymnasium felt more like a courtroom than a school hall that day. Rows of chairs were lined in perfect symmetry beneath glaring overhead lights. Journalists sat on the edge of their seats, press badges hanging like weapons, their cameras pointed like silent rifles. Parents filled the back bleachers, some clutching tissues, others crossing their arms defensively. Faculty members clustered near the front, whispering among themselves, their faces tight with tension. At the center of it all stood a wooden podium and a single microphone, waiting. Colton Briggs sat beside his father on the front row, gripping a worn composition notebook. The same one he used in the janitor's break room, where he first started solving high school-level problems years too early. The notebook that still smelled faintly of bleach. The chairperson announced his name. Colton Elijah Briggs, 7th grade student, Jefferson Heights Academy. You may come forward. For a second, he didn't move. His legs were stone, his chest tight. Elijah leaned down and whispered, You don't have to speak like a man today. Just speak like my son. Colton swallowed hard, then the walk to the podium felt longer than it should have. As he climbed the steps, the room grew quiet, suffocatingly so. All eyes were on him, not in ridicule this time, but not fully in welcome either. Some people watched with sympathy, others with doubt, still others with fear, the kind of fear that came when the stories you told yourself about your own fairness began to crack. Colton reached the mic, placed the notebook down, and took a breath. It was barely a whisper at first. My name is Colton Briggs. A few people in the back leaned in. I'm 12, he said, eyes fixed on the middle distance, not making contact yet. My dad works here. He's the janitor. I stay after school sometimes because we don't have a car. We live a few blocks away. He looked down at the paper, then back up. For 3 years I've been learning math in silence. Not in class, not with a teacher, in storage rooms, in basements, with books that other kids threw away. He paused. Nobody ever asked me what I knew. Nobody ever checked to see what I was learning. They just looked through me. There was a murmur from the parents section. Someone stifled a sob. Colton gripped the edges of the podium. Last month, I got called onto stage, in front of everyone. Principal Dalton gave me a problem, a hard one, hard on purpose. I think it was supposed to embarrass me, because of who I am, because of who my dad is. He turned his eyes slowly toward Dalton, sitting stiffly among school officials. Their gazes met only for a second, but it felt eternal. I solved the problem, Colton said. He cut me off before I finished, but I solved it anyway. I finished it on the back of the board. Gasps echoed faintly across the room. I didn't do that to show off, he continued. I did it because I needed to know I could. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't wrong about who I am. That I'm not just a kid who mops behind my dad. The notebook lay open, but he never looked down again. There are 2 versions of me in this school. One the staff sees, one that nobody sees. The first one, that version is quiet, easy to ignore, doesn't raise his hand too often. Gets called respectful, when really, he's just scared. A wave of discomfort washed over the teachers seated behind the board. The other version, Colton said, voice rising, solves problems most seniors can't. The other version reads college textbooks at night. The other version doesn't belong in the basement. He inhaled sharply. You never asked to meet that version. Elijah closed his eyes. His throat burned with restrained emotion. Colton looked back at the crowd, his voice steady now. When my work got leaked online, people finally noticed me, but not as a student, as a symbol, a meme, a headline. And suddenly the school that ignored me said I was dangerous, that I was too emotional, that my supporters were a distraction. So, he turned slightly toward the camera crew, lining the gym's wall. Let me tell you what is distracting, he said. Trying to learn while being watched like a threat. Being told not to speak unless spoken to. Hearing your name pronounced wrong on purpose. Getting detention for asking questions. One mother in the back began to cry openly. Colton paused. This school told me I had to be twice as good just to be seen as average. I was never too loud. But I was always too black. Gasps rippled again. One teacher left the room. And I'm tired, he said, voice finally shaking. Tired of being a problem just because I solve them faster than I'm supposed to. He closed his notebook, though he hadn't read from it once. I'm not angry, Colton said, tears welling. I'm exhausted, and I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because I want to stay. I want to learn. I want to grow. I want to be treated like I matter. Not just when the cameras are on. Not just when it's trending, but every day. He took a breath. His final words echoed. I'm not a threat. I am a child who wanted to learn. For a second, no one moved. Then the applause started. It was slow, unsure, but then it spread, rising into thunderous ovation. Parents stood. Teachers stood. A group of students started chanting his name softly. Colton. Colton. Colton stepped down slowly, the silence inside him finally broken. Elijah met him at the steps and hugged him tight, one arm around his shoulders, the other shielding him from the storm of flashing cameras. 27 minutes later, the video of the speech was uploaded to social media. Within an hour it had 100,000 views. By morning it would hit 6 million. Hashtags like #NetColtonLearn and basement to boardroom exploded across every major platform. But the gymnasium hadn't even cleared out yet when another shockwave struck. The district superintendent, flushed and out of breath, pushed through the side doors of the gym and walked briskly to the school board members, huddled near the stage. Whispers followed. Then he turned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, face pale, we have breaking news. The gym fell into silence again, as if the emotional temperature had just dropped 20 degrees. The superintendent glanced at the notes in his hand. We've just received confirmation that a subpoena for Principal William Dalton's school-issued devices and private files has uncovered irregularities that extend beyond this school. Murmurs erupted. He continued. There is credible evidence suggesting multiple acts of document tampering, obstruction of scholarship applications, and most concerning, a network of silenced whistleblowers, pressured under threat of professional retaliation. Gasps exploded across the crowd. One school board member dropped her pen. This is now a criminal matter, the superintendent said. Principal Dalton is being placed on administrative leave effective immediately, pending investigation. All eyes turned to Dalton. He sat frozen. Still! And then, unexpectedly, he smiled. As Dalton is escorted out, a sealed folder slips from his briefcase and lands at Colton's feet. Inside, a list of names, other students, other prodigies he'd quietly suppressed. One of them was expelled years ago and has never been heard from again. The moment Principal Dalton was escorted out of the gym, silence spread like a virus. No one moved. No one cheered. It wasn't vindication yet. It was just shock. For the first time, Dalton wasn't standing tall. He was being walked out, arms stiff at his sides, flanked by two uniformed officers. His expression never changed. His lips remained pressed, his eyes unreadable. But Colton caught it. The trace of something behind his stillness. Not fear, not regret, control. Even in downfall, Dalton looked like a man who had backup plans. As he passed Colton and Elijah near the stage steps, something slipped from his briefcase. A folder. It landed lightly at Colton's feet with the softest whisper of cardboard. Colton bent down slowly and picked it up. Inside was a list, typed names. Rows of them. Alongside each one, test scores, scholarship notes, teacher assessments. But something didn't fit. Every name belonged to a Black or Latino student. Some were current. Most were former. A red line had been drawn through several. One name caught Colton's eye. Andre Monroe. Next to it, expelled. No appeal allowed. Removed from records. Colton turned the page. Andre's transcript wasn't there. Just a note. Under no circumstances allow contact with board. Elijah saw it over his son's shoulder and exhaled sharply. He's done this before, he said under his breath. This wasn't about you, son. This was about control. And now, someone had the proof. 48 hours later, the state education commissioner announced the official launch of a formal investigation into Jefferson Heights Academy. The press conference was live-streamed. The podium was draped with the district's emblem, but the words that followed shredded the school's image to ribbons. After reviewing student complaints, faculty testimonies, and internal documentation, including newly recovered files, this board has found substantial evidence of systemic discrimination, academic suppression, and intentional gatekeeping under the leadership of Principal William Dalton. Colton watched from the living room couch, arms folded across his chest. He didn't smile, not even a little. There was no joy in being right when the cost of proof was pain. Behind him, Elijah stood by the window, peeking through the blinds every time a car slowed in front of their building. The world had changed, but it hadn't gotten safer. The interim principal arrived the next day. Her name was Dr. Lane Everett. Sharp eyes, silver-streaked curls, and a resume longer than most dissertations. She didn't smile much, but when she did, it was the kind that felt earned. And when she stood at the school's front steps and addressed the students, she didn't start with a speech about excellence. She said, "You were wronged. Some of you more than others, and it ends now." Within her first week, she suspended the school's tracking system. Every student placed in remedial courses without proper review was reevaluated. She invited external consultants to audit academic decisions, and she met personally with every student who had been denied advanced class access under Dalton's administration. Colton was among them. She didn't shake his hand when he walked into her office. She stood and looked him directly in the eye. "You deserved better," she said. Then she handed him a folder. Accelerated Placement Program. Effective immediately. Colton blinked at it. "Just like that?" Dr. Everett gave a small nod. "Not just like that. Because of that." But as fairness finally began to bloom in one corner of Jefferson Heights, shadows thickened in another. Online, a group of anonymous parents formed a Facebook group under the name Jefferson Fairness First. Its mission? To preserve academic integrity and prevent politicization of merit. But their posts told a different story.
"This school's being hijacked."
"No more free passes for janitor's kids. We don't apologize for being excellent." They never mentioned Colton by name, but everyone knew who they were talking about. The messages started subtly. A photo slipped into Colton's locker, a cartoon of a janitor sweeping away books with merit written on them. A comment under a local news article. "Kid's smart, but he doesn't belong in the spotlight." A crumpled note left on Elijah's windshield at the grocery store. "Teach your son not to reach." Elijah filed police reports. No arrests followed. Colton changed his route to class. Avoided the hall where older students gathered. Kept earbuds in even when no music played. He didn't talk to the press anymore. He barely talked at all. One evening, Elijah found him sitting in the dark of the living room, staring at a blank sheet of graph paper. "You haven't touched your notebook in days," Elijah said. Colton shrugged. "I thought you loved solving problems." Colton looked down. "Not these kinds." Elijah sat beside him, his voice low. "They want to break you, son. That's why they're doing this. Not because you're wrong, but because you're right, and you're still standing." Colton's voice cracked. "I didn't ask to be a symbol." "You didn't have to. I'm just a kid." "I know. I just wanted to learn." Elijah pulled him close. "You still can." A silence stretched between them. Then Colton whispered, "I don't want to be scared of school anymore." Elijah nodded. "Then we don't give them the satisfaction." But the next day it got worse. Colton walked into school with his hoodie pulled tight and head down. He tried to move quickly through the main hallway, avoiding eye contact. He kept telling himself, just get to homeroom. Just get to math. He stopped at his locker, turned the dial, pulled it open. Inside was a torn piece of paper, not folded, not hidden. Just sitting there, staring back at him, like it belonged. Black marker. All caps. "You should have stayed in the basement." His hands froze. His chest went cold. The hallway blurred. The noise around him faded. Colton took a small step back, closed the locker slowly, and turned around, The students kept walking like nothing had happened. But someone saw. Someone knew. Someone wanted him to know. Later that day, security footage reveals the person who left the message was not a student, but a faculty member. And not just any faculty member. Someone who once mentored Dalton himself. The note in Colton's locker didn't make the front page. Not at first. A torn scrap of paper. 7 words scrawled in thick marker. You should have stayed in the basement. It could have been written by anyone. Could have been a joke. Could have been a cruel whisper passed through scribbled ink. But Colton knew better. It wasn't a joke. And it wasn't random. The security footage confirmed it. Principal Everett pulled Elijah into her office the next day. She didn't waste time. Her monitor showed a time-stamped video. Black and white. Grainy. But clear enough. The hallway was empty. No students in sight. Then, a door opened. A faculty member emerged. One Colton had seen before. A man with thinning gray hair, a tucked-in polo, and an air of detached politeness. Mr. Rollins, a longtime assistant to Dalton, and former teacher turned curriculum consultant. He walked to Colton's locker like he'd done it 100 times, slipped something inside, glanced both ways, then walked away. Principal Everett pressed pause. Elijah stared at the screen. He still works here. She nodded. Not anymore. Rollins was quietly placed on administrative leave. The next morning, the district issued a statement. They called it an unfortunate breach of ethical conduct. But no one said the word hate. By the end of that week, Colton had received 4 more anonymous messages. One was mailed to their apartment, postmarked from out of state. It read, "You humiliated the wrong people." Another appeared under Elijah's car windshield, while he worked the night shift at the school. "How far do you want to push this?" Still, police officers shrugged. "Hard to trace. Could have been anyone. Do you have enemies? This could be an unrelated prank." Elijah asked them if they'd take it seriously if the roles were reversed. They didn't answer. It wasn't just messages. Their apartment door was egged twice. One night, they returned from the grocery store to find all 4 tires on Elijah's truck slashed. The word liar had been etched into the hood with a key. Colton didn't say anything. He just looked at it. Long and quiet. When Elijah told him it would be okay, Colton replied, "I don't believe you." The school offered an emergency solution, remote instruction, just until things settled down. Elijah agreed. Not because it was fair, but because it was safer. Colton was officially withdrawn from physical attendance at Jefferson Heights. His room became his classroom. The kitchen table became his lab. The isolation, at first, felt like freedom. No more whispers in the hallway. No more cautious smiles from teachers who didn't know what to say. Just silence. Books. Equation. And time. He had time now. And that's when the brilliance began to bloom again. Within 2 months, Colton began publishing short white papers online, under a pseudonym E.B. Minor, a nod to his father's initials, Elijah Briggs. He shared theories about abstract algebra, chaotic systems, and nonlinear curve modeling. He started designing math problems that baffled adults on online forums. Some professors responded, others dismissed the work, until one of his models began gaining traction in cryptography circles. It was a pattern-based theory of prime number prediction, something long assumed to be unsolvable, without quantum tech. His post went viral in academic forums. University IP addresses began appearing in the download logs. MIT, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon. But Colton remained quiet. He didn't claim it publicly. He didn't want fame. He wanted peace. And peace was hard to find when your name still trended once a week. On social media. One Sunday night, Elijah returned from a late shift. He found Colton asleep at the kitchen table, math sheets covering his arms, like a blanket. The boy had fallen asleep mid-equation. Elijah didn't wake him. He sat across from him, watching the slow rise and fall of his breath. The pencil was still in Colton's hand, his eyes twitching behind his lids, like he was solving problems even in sleep. "Too much for one soul," Elijah whispered. He began cleaning quietly, folding the notes, stacking the books. Then came the knock. 3 sharp taps. Not rushed, not friendly. Elijah opened the door cautiously. Standing there was a man in a dark coat, a briefcase in one hand. No smile, no badge, just calm, composed stillness. "I'm looking for Colton Elijah Briggs," the man said. Elijah tensed. "He's not. What's this about?" The man opened the briefcase and pulled out a letter with a sealed gold emblem. He handed it to Elijah. I'm not here officially, he said. Not yet. Elijah narrowed his eyes.
Then who are you?
The man extended a hand. Professor Dana Winthrop. Theoretical mathematics. MIT. Elijah didn't shake it. Winthrop nodded, unfazed. May I come in? Professor Winthrop lays the letter on the table and says, this doesn't go through admissions. This goes through history. If Colton's ready. Professor Dana Winthrop's presence in the Briggs apartment felt like something out of a different world, a world where polished suits spoke quietly and held power without needing permission. He didn't try to charm. He didn't offer condolences. He simply sat at the kitchen table across from Elijah and Colton, placed the sealed envelope on the table, and said, this doesn't go through admissions. This goes through history. If Colton's ready. Elijah didn't touch the letter. He studied the man. Instead, you're from MIT, he said slowly, like testing the weight of the truth. Yes. Though I don't operate in the traditional lanes. Colton tilted his head. What does that mean? Winthrop leaned in. It means there are programs that exist off the grid, spaces built not for fame or funding, but for minds that don't fit into rows and bells and standardized tests. You're not the first genius to scare a system, Colton. But most geniuses don't get second chances. Elijah narrowed his eyes. And what do you want in return? Nothing, Winthrop said, except honesty and the willingness to stretch your mind further than anyone's allowed you to. Colton hesitated. Why now? Winthrop smiled. Because most of the world still sees you as a story. I see you as a solution. 2 days later, they boarded a train to Vermont. No fanfare. No school permission slip. Just a private invitation, GPS coordinates, and a soft warning from Winthrop. What you'll see, you won't unsee. The train rolled through forest and snow-covered hills until the conductor quietly motioned them to depart at a small unmapped platform. Waiting there was a black SUV with tinted windows. Neither Elijah nor Colton spoke during the drive. They arrived at what looked like a colonial mansion tucked between mountains. Once a historical landmark, now a highly secured compound. A single word was engraved above its massive wooden door. Census. Inside, the space looked like a cross between a cathedral and a lab. Marble floors. Massive whiteboards. Digital panels embedded into desks. No bells. No schedules. No teachers shouting instruction. And no students. Over 7. Winthrop walked them down quiet corridors, where children solved real-time astrophysics models on touchscreen walls, mapped complex protein chains, and debated mathematical ethics in whispered tones. It wasn't chaos. It was focus. Organized silence. Are they all like me? Colton asked. Winthrop paused. No. They're like no one. Just like you. A girl with platinum braids solved a 3-variable integral faster than Colton could read it. A boy in a wheelchair reprogrammed a micro-drone with one hand and a foot pedal. Another kid had a whiteboard filled with what looked like musical notation, but it was actually code. Colton blinked. What is this place? A sanctuary, Winthrop said, and a crucible. Over dinner, Colton asked the girl with platinum braids how she ended up there.
They saw my math blog, she said casually, munching on a slice of grilled tofu. I was 13 and disproved a geometry theorem that had been accepted since the 70s. My principal failed me for academic arrogance. MIT called me the next day.
Colton stared. She grinned. It gets weirder. That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. He walked the quiet halls alone, hands deep in his hoodie pockets. The place felt too perfect, too engineered, too white, not racially, but ideologically. Everything gleamed with ambition. When Winthrop found him staring at the physics wing, he didn't ask questions. He just stood beside him. You're worried, Winthrop said. I've spent 12 years watching my son get used, Elijah replied. I'm not about to hand him over to the Ivy League machine just because the gears look shinier. Winthrop didn't flinch. I don't want to own him. I want to free him. Elijah looked sideways. Freedom and isolation can look a lot alike. Here, he chooses what matters. For the first time. Elijah didn't respond. He just stared through the glass wall at his son, who was sketching something with the girl from dinner on a digital board. Winthrop placed a sealed envelope in Elijah's hand. He doesn't know this yet. You should be the one to decide. At breakfast, Colton was more alive than Elijah had seen in weeks. They're solving something no one's cracked since 1998, Colton said between bites. It's a recursive pattern. I saw it. I felt it, Dad. Elijah smiled thinly. You looked like you belonged. Colton nodded, not catching the sadness behind the compliment. Then Winthrop walked in. Everyone grew quiet. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a grand announcement. He simply walked to Colton and placed a small envelope on his tray. "This one's for you." Colton wiped his hands and opened it. Inside, a single sheet of paper. No instructions, just a dense equation that spanned 2 lines. He frowned. "I don't recognize this." "You wouldn't," Winthrop said. "It's unsolved. Has been for 32 years. Colton's eyes widened. "Why me?" "Because when we give this to grad students, they panic. When we gave it to our youngest, she cried. But you," he smiled, "you breathe math. You feel when it's right." Colton stared at the page. "If you solve this," Winthrop said quietly, "you won't need to prove anything ever again." As Colton reads the problem again, something clicks. Not in his head, but in his memory. He's seen part of this before. In a discarded notebook, left behind in the Jefferson Heights janitor's closet. A name was scribbled next to it. Andre Monroe. The moment Colton touched the envelope, something shifted. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. The equation inside wasn't entirely foreign. A fragment of it, jagged and half erased, had once lived in the pages of an old notebook buried at the bottom of a mop bucket in the Jefferson Heights basement. Colton remembered the water-stained pages, the penciled calculations, and a name scrawled in the corner. Andre Monroe. He hadn't understood it then. Now he did. He spent the entire night at the census facility's whiteboard room. Eyes burning, hands trembling, but brain lit like wildfire. The pieces fell into place. Monroe's partial work provided a forgotten foundation, and Colton built on it. Not in imitation, but in evolution. By dawn he had rewritten the structure of the equation 3 times. Not because it was wrong, but because he knew it could be more elegant. And when he stepped away from the board at sunrise, Winthrop stood at the doorway silently, watching. "You didn't sleep," Winthrop said quietly. "I didn't need to." Winthrop approached, scanning the board. Then his eyes widened. He wasn't just impressed. He was stunned. Winthrop called in 2 colleagues, one of whom took a picture and encrypted it through a closed university server. Within hours, an international mathematics review board had verified the solution. 32 years of intellectual stalemate, broken overnight. By a 12-year-old boy once considered invisible. News didn't trickle. It erupted. At first, it was whispers in academic circles. Then someone leaked the name, Colton Elijah Briggs. The child prodigy who solved an unsolvable equation. The boy who once cleaned chalkboards while his father mopped floors. Within 24 hours, Colton's face was everywhere. TV anchors struggled to pronounce his name, but praised him anyway. "American genius," headlines rolled out. A segment on national morning television labeled him the basement Einstein. Podcasters sent agents. News outlets offered 5-figure sums for exclusives. Private schools offered full scholarships. Tech companies tried to outbid each other with research opportunities. One corporation even sent a custom laptop with Colton's name engraved on it. But behind the emails, the smiles and the sponsorships, lay something else. Something Elijah saw clearly. Ownership. People wanted Colton, not to support him, to claim him. Elijah sat at the kitchen table, phone buzzing nonstop beside him. Colton, curled on the couch with headphones in, stared at nothing. The boy wasn't celebrating. He was withdrawing. Elijah opened an email from a corporate executive. They wanted Colton to be the face of emerging youth brilliance. The compensation? 6 figures. A press tour. Even a personal driver. Elijah closed the laptop without responding. Later that evening, a man in a navy suit showed up at their apartment. Elijah didn't recognize him. The man extended a branded folder and smiled as if he were offering magic. "This is a legacy package," the man said smoothly. "For you, the caretaker." "Caretaker?" Elijah asked, stiffening. "You've been a remarkable support system for Colton. We believe his story deserves the right framing. We're prepared to compensate you as his point of contact." Elijah didn't let him finish. "He's not your property." The man blinked, smile fading. "With all due respect, Mr. Briggs, this is a once-in-a-generation narrative." "You're damn right it is. And it's his, not yours." Elijah shut the door. They pulled Colton from all public appearances the next day. Winthrop agreed. Protect the boy. The work will survive without the noise. But the world wasn't ready to let go. Reddit threads exploded with theories. Was it really his solution? Too fast. Too clean. Maybe his dad coached him. Fabricated by MIT for funding. The praise turned to scrutiny. Admiration turned to suspicion. And then, the final blow. A viral podcast titled The Math Hoax Nobody's Talking About released an explosive episode. The guest? William Dalton. The disgraced former principal sat in a dimly lit room, voice smooth and confident. I always had concerns about that boy, Dalton said. He was clever, sure, but clever enough to manipulate. He had access to old-school archives, plenty of opportunities to steal past work and present it as his own. The host leaned in. So, you're saying the solution wasn't original?
Dalton smiled.
I'm saying there's more to the story. And I wouldn't be surprised if someone coached him. Someone with an agenda. Clips from the podcast spread like wildfire. Former principal exposes prodigy fraud. Became the trending headline on multiple platforms. Colton watched silently as his Wikipedia page was edited to include the word controversial. He closed his laptop. I don't want to do this anymore, he whispered. Elijah stood behind him, fists clenched. He lied, and we're not letting him get away with it. What can we do? Colton asked, voice hollow. It's already out there. Elijah knelt down. Then we fight. Not with fists, with truth. A lawyer appears at their door the next morning. Not from Dalton's team, but from a major network. Colton has been subpoenaed to testify. Under oath. In court, the letter came in a plain white envelope. No fancy legal crest. No warning label. Just a line of block letters across the front. Subpoena enclosed. Colton stared at it, barely blinking. Elijah took it from his hands and opened it, reading slowly. The words wrapped around him like ice. You are hereby summoned to appear and testify in court. Colton had never been in a courtroom before. But now, at 13, he was being called to defend the truth of his own mind, against a man who once tried to humiliate him on stage. Dalton's podcast spread like gasoline on dry brush. Clips went viral, stitched and spun with misleading graphics. The prodigy hoax. Did media create a genius? Is Colton Briggs a fraud? Anonymous accounts released forged screenshots of old gradebooks. Someone published a deepfake video showing Colton supposedly reading from Andre Monroe's notebook. A video fabricated with AI so realistic it fooled thousands. Forums exploded. Reddit threads called him the math thief. Conservative radio stations latched onto the story. This is what happens when we glorify victim narratives. One host said, they cheat the system, then play innocent. Colton stopped eating. He didn't cry, he just stopped. He sat for hours staring at the window, flinching every time a car slowed near their building. When his old teacher, Mr. Hawthorne, texted to offer support, Colton typed a reply and never hit send. Elijah, watching his son disappear behind the silence, made a call. Marcella Reese was a civil rights attorney with a courtroom presence that could make judges sit straighter. She had taken on school districts, hospitals, and corporations, and won. She met them in their apartment, scanning the kitchen clutter and the unwashed dishes, before sitting across from Colton. Truth doesn't shout, she said. It doesn't trend, but it survives. Colton didn't respond. Marcella leaned in. You were never meant to be digestible. That's not what brilliance is. That's not what black genius ever is. They're afraid of what you prove. Elijah swallowed hard. Can we win this? Marcella's eyes didn't blink. We can bury him. They filed a formal lawsuit against Dalton for defamation, slander, and emotional damage. The paperwork hit the press less than 24 hours later. News anchors clutched the story with both hands. Former principal faces defamation lawsuit by student genius. But with the attention came division. Some media voices defended Colton. A Harvard mathematician tweeted, "The solution holds. Colton's work is original. I reviewed it myself." An op-ed in The Atlantic called Dalton a relic of racist gatekeeping. But the backlash still roared louder. Skeptics built a website called the Colton Files, filled with conspiracies and amateur investigations. They demanded Elijah's tax records, claiming the family was profiting off manufactured trauma. They made videos comparing Colton to other discredited prodigies, most of them white. Elijah received threatening phone calls at work. You're not special. Get ready for your son to be exposed. The police offered vague promises and generic sympathy. Colton started sleeping with the lights on. As the court date loomed, Colton's anxiety grew unbearable. He couldn't focus. He second-guessed every memory, every moment on stage, every notebook page he'd ever read. What if he's right? He whispered one night. Elijah looked at him sharply. You don't get to doubt your soul because a coward is loud. But what if I only solved it because of that notebook? You solved it because no one else could. That's the difference. That's what they hate. Marcella prepared him for the testimony. You'll be questioned about your memory, your process, your education. They'll try to confuse you. Colton sat stiffly. And if I mess up, then we press harder, with the truth. Not because you owe them clarity, but because they're not used to a child not breaking. Court day arrived in a haze of media vans and flashing cameras. Inside, the courtroom was cold and sterile. Colton wore a pressed navy suit 2 sizes too big. Elijah sat behind him, gripping the seat. Dalton stood with a smirk, flanked by high-profile attorneys and a PR team taking notes. The judge entered. The trial began. Colton took the stand. He adjusted the microphone and folded his hands. Please state your name for the court. Colton Elijah Briggs. Age: 13. The opposing counsel wasted no time. You claim to have solved an equation independently. Have you ever seen versions of it before? Colton hesitated. I saw a partial version once, years ago. I didn't understand it then. And where did you see it? In a notebook left behind by someone named Andre Monroe. He worked at my school before I was born. Yet you expect the court to believe your solution is your own. Colton looked out at the jury. Yes. Isn't it true that your rise to fame followed a carefully orchestrated media narrative? No. Colton said. It followed the truth. The lawyer chuckled. Convenient. Marcella stood for redirect. Colton, can you explain your process for solving the equation? Colton took a deep breath. I combined 2 systems, Monroe's partial framework and a geometric model I'd built while homeschooled. I didn't copy anything. I filled in what was missing. And why didn't you cite Monroe's work? Colton swallowed. Because no one cared who he was until I finished it. Now they care. The room fell silent. Even Dalton seemed shaken. As court adjourns for the day, a man waiting outside hands Colton a photo, an old staff portrait from Jefferson Heights dated 1993. In the back row stands a man labeled Monroe A. The twist, standing beside him, is a young William Dalton. The courtroom lights were harsh under the national spotlight, magnified tenfold by the sea of cameras perched along the gallery. What began as a defamation case had become something far bigger, a national referendum on truth, race, and who gets to be believed. When Colton walked back into court, escorted by Marcella and his father, the gallery hushed. His navy blue blazer was slightly oversized, but his posture had grown straighter. Each step carried the weight of every lie, every insult, and every attempt to erase him. The moment he took the stand again, every lens zoomed in. The judge addressed the jury. You are not to be influenced by public opinion. You are here for facts. Facts only. But the truth had already taken a form they couldn't unsee. A boy, barely 13, defending the originality of a mind the world tried to frame as borrowed. Marcella stood beside Colton, her voice measured and low. Colton, would you please walk the court through your process for solving the equation in question? Colton paused, eyes scanning the court. Not to impress, to center himself. I don't see equations like other people, he began softly. I see patterns, shapes, sometimes rhythms. A few jurors leaned in. When I saw the equation, I remembered something I'd once seen. Not the answer, just a pattern someone else had started. I took that shape, and I ran with it. Not by copying it, but by stretching it. He lifted his hand, motioning like painting in air. Like listening to a melody someone hummed once, and finishing the song. An audible breath moved through the courtroom. The prosecution moved to dismiss his metaphor, but the judge allowed it. He's explaining how he thinks. Let him. Marcella presented Colton's personal notebooks, time-stamped logs, and digital folders from his homeschooling. Each page, dense with work, showed a child building something that wasn't taught. It was unearthed. Then came the experts. Dr. Ingrid Thorne, a leading mathematician from Caltech, took the stand. I reviewed the problem. Not only is Colton's solution correct, it introduces an entirely new method of recursive modeling. This wasn't lifted. This was pioneered. And do you believe the accusations of plagiarism have merit? None. If anything, it's insulting to his intelligence. Next came Professor Hayter from Stanford. He testified that Colton's solution could unlock new pathways in data compression, technology decades ahead, and the overlap with Monroe's old notes. Marcella asked. Minimal. Like using the same word in a sentence. The structure is completely his own. Dalton, seated across the courtroom, began to crumble visibly. He tapped his pen repeatedly. He shifted in his seat. His attorney whispered furiously. Then the hammer fell. A surprise witness, Ms. Lorraine Beach, a former Jefferson Heights staff member, elderly now, but with fire in her voice. I remember Monroe, brilliant young man, the only black academic to submit advanced work. Dalton shut him down every chance he got. What do you mean? He made Monroe clean classrooms. Told him to stop distracting the real students. When Monroe reported it, Dalton lost his files. The gallery gasped. And now you think he's targeting Colton the same way? I don't think it. I see it. Dalton was called to the stand again. Under oath, he tried to maintain composure. I only wanted academic honesty, he insisted. It wasn't about race. Marcella pounced. Then why erase Monroe's contributions? I didn't erase anything. Why claim Colton had access to a notebook that was destroyed in Dalton stuttered. Someone must have copied it. Marcella raised her eyebrows. Someone? Or are you just trying to rewrite the narrative again? Dalton's face flushed red. Colton sat quietly as the court played old footage. The moment Dalton had cut him off on stage during that school assembly. The recording was grainy, but the humiliation was clear. A small boy solving a high-level math problem, and a grown man cutting him off under the pretense of time limits. The jury watched, and remembered. During recess, Colton sat with Elijah outside the courtroom. They still look at me like I'm a story, Colton said. You are, Elijah replied, but you're not fiction. As the trial resumed, the judge leaned forward. Members of the jury have submitted a request. They would like to review Mr. Briggs' unpublished work from the last 6 months, particularly the equation sets developed after the solution went public. The room went still. The judge turned to Marcella. Is the family willing to share this material? Marcella looked at Elijah and Colton. Elijah nodded slowly. We have nothing to hide. That evening, Colton returned to his digital folder. He hesitated before opening it. These were the rawest parts of himself, not yet refined, not yet ready, but they were real. He printed 47 pages of formulas, notes, and theoretical questions. No coaching, no edits, just Colton. The court clerk accepted them the next morning. The jury retreated. Outside, news vans blared headlines. Hashtags trended again.
Believe Colton.
Math trial. Justice for Monroe. National figures weighed in. Some called the trial a disgrace. Others called it justice delayed. One op-ed in the New York Times read, Colton Briggs isn't just fighting to prove himself. He's fighting to restore every mind that was silenced before him. In a final twist, the Monroe family came forward. Andre Monroe's younger sister released a statement. My brother dreamed of building something that mattered. He died believing the world had no room for minds like his. Colton's courage gives our family something we never expected. Proof that he mattered, that his mind lived on. As the jury deliberates, Marcella receives a sealed envelope from the courthouse clerk. Inside is a single sentence from the jury. We have a verdict and a request. The room fell so silent. The hum of the air conditioner sounded like thunder. The jury sat, each member leafing through Colton's personal math journal, 47 pages bound in soft plastic sleeves, filled with colored ink, sketches, and equations layered like a symphony. The foreperson squinted at a page titled Inverse Recursive Fractals in Nonlinear Dimensions. Next to it, in childlike handwriting, Colton had scribbled, I see this like music notes dancing. One juror whispered, he's not just solving problems, he's composing them. A second juror nodded. It's not mimicry, it's invention. When the judge allowed independent verification of the material, the court summoned Dr. Thorne and a panel of credentialed academics. They didn't come quietly, they came impressed. Dr. Thorne stood with the document in hand. Colton's thought process doesn't merely follow known academic paths, it creates them. His spatial perception of mathematical relationships is something we've never documented at this level. Is it original? Marcella asked from the counsel table. Dr. Thorne looked straight at the jury. It's beyond original. It's paradigm shifting. Professor Winthrop, who had introduced Colton to the underground program, testified next. His voice trembled slightly. I've seen early writings by Feynman, von Neumann, and Turing, he said. But I've never seen anything like this from someone under 15. If nurtured correctly, Colton Briggs could be one of the most important mathematical thinkers of this century. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Cameras clicked furiously. Dalton, seated at the defense table, looked pale. His posture slumped further with each passing minute. He stared ahead, no longer looking at Colton, or even at his own attorney. It was as if the weight of exposure had finally crushed the years of false superiority he'd built his career upon. The mask of control had shattered. He wasn't being tried for his racism. He was being erased by the truth he tried to bury. As the court recessed for deliberations, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. National anchors summarized the trial as a landmark moment in educational accountability. On TikTok, teens shared videos solving their own math problems in honor of Colton. Others posted clips of themselves reading Monroe's forgotten thesis. The two names, Colton Briggs and Andre Monroe, began trending together under one banner: Truth Unburied. When the jury returned, they did so with a purpose that echoed through every footstep. The verdict? Dalton was found guilty of defamation, obstruction of educational opportunity, and professional misconduct. The damages awarded to Colton and Elijah exceeded $1.2 million, money no one had asked for, but money that would now rewrite a broken story. But more powerful than the ruling was the judge's closing statement. This court affirms the intellectual authorship of Colton Briggs and denounces the racial prejudice that attempted to silence him. Education is not a privilege reserved for the socially accepted. It is a right, and so is truth. Outside, media lined up for the family's response. Elijah, humble and worn, simply placed a hand on Colton's shoulder and said, "My son taught himself because the system never bothered to try. That ends now." Then Colton, quiet but clear, said into the mic, "There are more of us out there, hidden, ignored, underestimated. I just got lucky enough to be seen." That evening, as the courthouse cleared and the crowd dispersed, a soft-spoken man in a tailored gray blazer waited near the parking lot. "Elijah Briggs?" he asked. Elijah tensed, protectively stepping in front of Colton. "I'm with Polaris University," the man said, gently offering a sealed envelope. "I don't want my son being sold as some prodigy package deal," Elijah said cautiously. "This isn't for your son," the man replied. "It's for you." Inside the envelope was a formal offer letter from Polaris's Department of Youth Research Mentorship.
Elijah Briggs.
Your unwavering commitment, guidance, and vision have not gone unnoticed. We would like to invite you to join Polaris University as a full-time research mentorship fellow. This position includes full salary, health benefits, housing assistance, and program authority to design mentorship models based on your experience. Elijah stared at the letter, lips parted. For years he had pushed a mop through hallways that never spoke his name. Now a university wanted him to mentor gifted students, not clean up after them. He looked at Colton, eyes misting. "I don't understand," he said. "Why me?" "Because you didn't just raise a genius," the man replied. "You protected one." Elijah unfolds the letter, eyes wide. For the first time in years, they see a future with no mops, only minds. The morning sun hit differently on university grounds. For the first time in decades, Elijah Briggs woke up without the buzz of fluorescent janitor lights. His alarm wasn't for mops or maintenance calls. It was for a morning lecture on mentorship, followed by a research meeting with faculty. His first class was titled "Seeing What They Won't Teach You to See." Polaris University had welcomed Elijah and Colton, not as charity cases, but as change agents. Their story had sparked a national conversation, and now they were living its ripple effect. Elijah's job was to mentor other parents and educators in recognizing untapped brilliance in unlikely places. He taught them how to observe, how to encourage, and most importantly, how to believe in students who didn't look like the ones usually given a chance. Colton, now 13, had his own schedule. But instead of math worksheets, his days were filled with research consultations. Professors often left sessions with pages of notes from a boy who still carried the same spiral notebook he used in the basement. His project? Designing curriculum modules for students who, like him, couldn't learn through memorization or lectures, but could build universes in their minds if someone just asked the right question. Colton called it seeing math. No one had ever explained equations to him as visual languages. So, he did it himself. Then he built modules for others. And slowly, schools across the country began piloting them. Meanwhile, Jefferson Heights Academy, The school that once tried to humiliate him was changing from the inside out. Dr. Everett, now principal full-time, invited Elijah to host a district-wide educator summit on equity. He declined, but he sent Colton. Colton didn't give a speech. He gave a lesson. On the whiteboard where he was once ridiculed, he wrote, "It wasn't math I needed help with. It was permission." The teachers in the room, many of whom had once overlooked him, couldn't look away. Elijah and Colton began hosting free workshops for marginalized students in other towns, especially those where poverty and bias often meant invisibility. Each Saturday, they invited local kids into the Polaris Outreach Hall. They weren't taught to pass tests. They were taught to think, to see patterns, to trust their minds. National news caught wind again. But this time, the headlines didn't talk about racism or controversy. They read, "Janitor and Genius Rewrite the System." Briggs Model Sweeps 3-State Education Pilot. Father-son duo. Create new path for Black excellence. But behind every victory there was still a quiet wound. Elijah sometimes stared at the old mop hanging in their garage. He hadn't thrown it away. He couldn't, because for 20 years, that mop had been his only power, his only way of staying close enough to protect his son from a world that tried to erase boys like him. Colton saw him staring once. "You don't need to keep it," Colton said gently. Elijah shook his head. "It's not for cleaning anymore." He mounted it on the wall like an artifact, next to Colton's first published paper. The National School Board approached Colton with a grant. They wanted him to formally develop an accelerated learning program for gifted students in overlooked zip codes. Colton agreed, under one condition. It had to be called the Monroe Initiative. No board member knew what that meant, but Elijah did. On the 1-year anniversary of their court victory, Colton gave a speech at a national education conference. He stood at the podium and looked out at rows of academics, journalists, policymakers. He didn't start with a quote. He started with a question. "How many children did you not see this year?" The silence answered everything. They returned home that evening, quiet, tired, but full. Elijah made tea. Colton sat at the table sketching a new theorem that had occurred to him mid-flight. And then came the knock. Not a loud one, just a soft, respectful tap. On the doorstep lay a flat envelope with an international stamp. Colton picked it up. No return address. Just one line on the front. "We've been watching your mind. The world needs it." A mysterious letter arrives from an international science coalition. Colton turned the envelope in his hands, as if it might vanish. The international stamp was embossed with a symbol he didn't recognize. A globe surrounded by interlocking mathematical symbols and language scripts rims around the world. Inside was a letter, printed on thick parchment. It read, "Dear Colton Briggs, the Global Equity in Education and Science Consortium cordially invites you to speak at the World Summit on Future Education and Intellectual Access. Your journey, intellect, and resilience embody the very future this summit was created to shape. Join us, not as a case study but as a co-author of what comes next." At the bottom was a list of signatories, Nobel laureates, UN officials, innovators from every continent. Elijah stared at the letter for a long moment. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered. But Colton, calm, steady, replied, "Yes, it does. Because after all the silence, all the closets he'd read in, all the chalkboard erasures done behind the world's back, someone had finally spoken in his language. They weren't asking him to be a guest. They were inviting him to be history. The summit was held in Geneva, inside a towering glass structure built entirely with sustainable energy and designed to resemble a spiral galaxy from above. As they landed in Switzerland, Colton peered out of the plane window, his face unreadable. Elijah noticed. "You nervous?" he asked. Colton shook his head. "No. Just thinking about the janitor's closet." They were greeted by dignitaries, translators, and a swarm of cameras. But unlike before, no one questioned Colton's presence. There was no disbelief, no condescension, just awe. He was the headliner, the keynote. A 13-year-old black boy from a school basement, now positioned to speak on a stage where presidents had once stood. Elijah watched from the front row as his son walked out, not in a suit, but in the same sneakers he used to clean in. He wore no tie, just clarity. Colton approached the microphone. He didn't clear his throat or look at notes. He simply said, "This stage wasn't built for someone like me, but maybe that's why I'm standing on it." He spoke for 19 minutes. About visibility. About the price of genius when it's wrapped in the wrong skin tone. About education not as a system, but as a right. He ended with a story. I was handed a problem meant to humiliate me. I solved it behind the board, not because I wanted revenge, but because math doesn't know racism. People do. The room rose in ovation. Some cried, others just stared. And across the world screens lit up with his name once more. But this time not as a headline changer. Backstage, a scholar from Tokyo handed Colton a sleek bound textbook. He flipped to a page marked with a ribbon. There, printed in bold, Briggs-Bennett theorem, a visual recursive breakthrough in algebraic function sets, first demonstrated by Colton Briggs, age 12, Jefferson Heights Academy, United States. Colton blinked. The same problem Principal Dalton had used to shame him was now named after him. He looked up at Elijah, and for the first time, tears fell. Elijah pulled him close. You didn't just solve a problem, son. You rewrote the question. Months later, Polaris University expanded the Monroe Initiative into 10 states. Jefferson Heights Academy became a model school for racial equity training. A statue was placed in the school courtyard, not of a founder or a donor, but of a boy sitting on a janitor's cart with a pencil in his hand. Elijah continued mentoring students and designing community mentorship blueprints across the country. Colton began building a foundation that distributed tech tools and curriculum to underfunded classrooms, all under one name: Basement Minds. Because he knew where brilliance starts, and how often it gets left behind. By age 15, Colton had published 4 academic papers. By 16, he was co-authoring international policy drafts on math education for gifted minorities. But he never lost his stillness or his clarity. In interviews, when asked what advice he had for struggling kids in overlooked districts, he would say, "If they won't let you in the room, build your own floor. And if they steal your answer, show them how you found it." One day, standing in front of a classroom of Polaris students, many of them first-generation learners like himself, Colton looked up at the board and saw a problem being projected. It was the first one Dalton ever gave him. And next to it were 2 words in bold font: Credit Briggs. He smiled, not because he'd won, but because someone else might see that problem now and know it came from someone who looked like them. No more closets, no more basements, just minds. And the legacy of one boy who was never supposed to speak, but ended up echoing across the world. If this story moved you, share it. Someone else needs to see it too. Subscribe for more true stories they tried to bury. Because talent doesn't come from status. It comes from struggle. And here's the question they never answered. How many geniuses have we silenced just because of where they came from?